Hello, everyone. Glad you're with me today. We're going to be in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. As we begin to look at this chapter, I'm reminded of two separate proverbs. One says, "Do not answer a fool according to his folly," and the other says, "Answer a fool according to his folly." Well, which is it? I think the proverbs say there's a time in which you answer a fool, and there's a time in which you just let it go. And Paul has come to chapter 11 and he says it is time to answer some fools. I think what he's saying here is, I have had it up to here. I've had it up to here with these people who've come in, Judaizers, false teachers, whoever they may be. I've had it up to here with them coming in, taking advantage of you, placing themselves on equal plane, saying they're equal with apostles. I've had it with them coming in and saying slanderous things about me to you. I'm tired of them vilifying me because of a simple change of plans that I've had. And so I'm going to do something that is very distasteful. Here you have these people that are a bunch of hot air. And he said, I'm going to start doing what they do. And he'll tell us this a couple times throughout the chapter. But in verse 1, he telegraphs what he's doing. Oh, that you would bear with me in a little folly. And indeed, you do bear with me. And so he says, here I'm going to put on the mask of an actor. I'm going to play a part. This is not who I really am. But here these sham guys come in, and they've put themselves before you as something genuine and real. And so I'm going to play the part that they play. I'm going to play the part of a fool. But he says, I want you to know something. I'm jealous for you with a godly jealousy, for I have betrothed you to one husband, that I may present you as a chaste virgin to Christ. Here's his motive. Here's his purpose. He says, I'm jealous with you with the same kind of jealousy that God has for his people. The idea of a betrothal was a little bit different than our engagement. There would be an agreement made between families, and a period of time in which the male would go off and prepare to come and get his bride and take her. And they would then have a week or more of feasting, and then the ceremony would take place. Years ago, there was something called a breach of promise, and that's more akin to what's taking place here. And Paul said, I betrothed you to one husband. That is, I'm not sharing you with anybody. You're mine, and I'm not sharing you with anybody. I am jealous with you over a godly jealousy. And so lest you think that I've lost my mind here. I'm playing the part of a fool, but more than that, I'm doing all I can to keep you. And then he will say in verse 3, but, and that little word but is an important little word. He says, but I fear lest somehow, as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, so your minds may be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ. Here comes a serpent who wants to bring all the lies that he comes to tell Eve. He comes as a deceiver, and he said, I'm concerned that these people have come in deceiving you. As long as Eve had one command, don't eat of the fruit of that tree of knowledge of good and evil, she did well. But now Satan comes in and he offers a complexity of issues. And Paul said, as long as I came in and was preaching Christ, you did well, but now these other people come in and they're preaching a different Jesus. As we'll see in a moment, a different Jesus, different spirit, and so on. And now you have a complexity of issues. And what their craftiness has done is they have challenged your single-mindedness. This idea of simplicity of mind is a single-mindedness. And so Paul said, I'm going to play the part of a fool here. It's not something that I really look forward to, but I'm going to answer a fool according to his folly. But I want you to know, I'm doing this so I can keep you. I'm not giving you up cheaply. But I don't want you to be deceived. So he will say in verse 4, the word for. For, if he who comes preaches another Jesus whom we have not preached, or different spirit which we have not received, or different gospel, which you have not accepted, you may well put up with it. In other words, here these guys come, and they come bringing their lies in, and they come offering this complexity of things, and you just it's like a baby bird with his mouth open, and the mother feeding the worm to the baby bird. You just open your mouth, and they're feeding you, and you just back off and you take it. I'm reminded of what Paul says in Galatians chapter 1, verses 8 and 9. If anyone comes preaching another gospel than what we have preached, let him be accursed. And here come these fellows. They're preaching a different Jesus, a different spirit, a different gospel. And what do you do? You may well put up with it. Why do you do that? Why do you put up with it like this? And so Paul will then say in verse 5, for I consider I am not at all inferior to the most eminent apostles. Keep in mind, Paul will say in other places that I'm like one born out of due season. But here he's not talking about the apostles of the Lord. He's calling these fellows that have come in saying they're on the same level as apostles, and he calls them eminent apostles. And so this is all sarcasm that he's using here. He says, for I consider I'm not inferior to the most eminent apostles. People say, I'm inferior, but I'm not inferior. These false teachers come and they seem to have a lot of charisma. The Corinthians should not have forced Paul into this boasting folly. But these false teachers come preaching another Jesus with a different spirit, and you just open your mouth and you take it like a baby bird, a worm from his mother. And I'm not going to back up from this. I'm on the same level as the most eminent apostles. And so then in verse 6 he says, even though I'm untrained in speech, yet I'm not in knowledge. But we have been thoroughly manifested among you in all things. Well, as we read Paul's letters, we know he wasn't untrained in speech. And we know he wasn't untrained in knowledge. But the very idea that these fellows would have come and brought what they did, and the Corinthians would have accepted it. The Corinthians are getting carried away with their persuasive delivery. And in their persuasive delivery, their smooth speech, they're taking into no account who they are. They're not paying attention to the content of the speech. It's a silly thing that this happens. You need to check the content. And really, this is an old trick. You draw attention to the surface in order to withdraw attention from the golden things underneath the surface. You fuss about the wrapping so that nobody will look at what is wrapped. And all you're doing is paying attention to the wrapping. These guys come in and they're charismatic. And now then they come in also verses 7 through 9 and they're greedy. He says, but I did not commit sin in humbling myself that you may be exalted because I preached the God. But let me back up. Did I commit sin in humbling myself that you might be exalted because I preached the gospel of God to you free of charge? I robbed of the churches, taking wages from them to minister to you. And when I was present with you and in need, I was not a burden to anyone. For what I lacked, the brethren who came from Macedonia supplied. And everything I've kept myself from being burdensome to you, and so I will keep myself. But what about these false teachers? They've come in and they're making merchandise of you. Paul said, I'm not inferior to who they are. Paul doesn't tone down his expression or his folly here. Paul lowered himself. He took no pay. He offered what he did free of charge. And yet, this is how he's treated. But these guys come in, and they charge you to the high heavens. They take advantage of you in every way. And you just kind of open your mouth and feed me like a baby bird. And you take it. He said, I'm thankful. I'm thankful that I was not a burden to you. These fellows come in and they've been nothing but a burden to you. And they've done nothing but take advantage of you. And so he will say then again in verse 10, as the truth of Christ is in me, no one shall stop me from this boasting in the regions of Achaia. He'd come in as one born out of due season, but he says, I am not going to back up from anyone regarding the work that I have done in Christ. These slanderers that were being circulated in Corinth about Paul amounted to nothing because he was worth nothing, and showed it by taking no pay from them. Paul says, I'm going to shut them up. What these enemies consider derogatory of Paul, Paul will advertise, and all Christians will continue to make it a boast regarding him, even in Achaia, Corinth included. And so he will say in verse 11, why? Why did I do this? Because I do not love you? No. God knows. For what I do, I will also continue to do, that I may cut off opportunity from those who desire an opportunity to be regarded just as we are in things of which they boast. And Paul says, these guys take no pay. These false teachers come in, they're charging you. I take no pay, and I'm not going to back up from that. But I want you to understand, we're not the same persons. The purpose for which these false apostles start, that they want to have you and take advantage of you. But Paul says again in verse 12, I'm not going to stop the boasting. I'm not going to stop boasting of what God has done with me in Christ. And then in verses 13 through 15, he exposes the arch enemy. He said, for such are apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into apostles of Christ. I'm not sure he's thinking about a physical transformation as much as a moral or attitudinal or transformation. And no wonder, for Satan himself transforms himself into an angel of light. Therefore, it's no great thing if these ministers also transform themselves into ministers of righteousness, whose end will be according to their works. So here's the devilishness of their work. They pretend to be God's ministers and to bestow great blessings upon you. They play their game for a while, but their end will be known. So here they come in and they change their philosophy, and they dress up their philosophy. They dress up their values, and they're just servants of Satan. And what they've done is they've come in acting like somebody they're not. And so we come to verses 16 through 21. I say again, let no one think me a fool, if otherwise at least receive me as a fool, that I also may boast a little. What I speak not according to the Lord, but as it were foolishly, in this confidence of boasting. Seeing that many boast according to the flesh, I also will boast. For you put up with fools gladly, since you yourselves are so wise. Oh, you guys are so smart, you know it all, and you're so smart you accept these fools in. But I'm playing the part of the fool, and you don't give me the same benefit of the doubt. Notice what he says. For you put up with it, if one brings you into bondage, if one devours you, if one takes from you, if one exalts himself, if one strikes you on the face. So here you are so smart. Nobody can tell you anything. You already know it. And yet these fools come in, and this is how they treat you. And then I'm accused. And now I'm playing the part of the fool here. This is just sarcasm. This is sharp and biting what Paul is doing. Here in this part that he's playing, he's simply trying to expose what these false teachers have done and how they have treated the Corinthians. If the Corinthians tolerate fools so well, Paul says, why don't you give me the same benefit of the doubt? Since you're so smart and do not mind having fools around you, then certainly you wouldn't mind having me around you. So Paul's concerned they're being misled and that they're being mistreated. How could the Corinthians be so deceived, he's saying? Because they looked like and they sounded like believers. And that's how they were able to sway so many along the way. And so he says, to our shame, I say that we were too weak for that. But if whatever anyone is bold, I speak foolishly, I also am bold. Paul says, what a disgrace for me and my helpers, poor weak fellows who couldn't act as abusive lords like that so you could submit to us. The disgrace is mine. Perhaps we could be ashamed for not treating you the same way. And so he again is playing on what these people are doing And again, you see the sarcasm in this. Well, excuse us for not treating you the same way. And so then he comes to verse 22. And verse 22 down through verse 28, Paul says, okay, if these guys think they're so good, you think you're so smart, if they want to compare resumes, if they want to compare pedigrees, then okay, I'll play the part of the fool in that. So let's just look at that. Paul says, are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they seed of Abraham? So am I. And then he says, are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. For I am more. In labors, the idea of labors looks at the idea of burdensome, exhaustive labors. These sham ministers don't even work for Christ, to say nothing about labor. In prison stripes above measure, in prisons frequently, and deaths often. Are these sham ministers? Do they receive a stripe for Christ? Do they bear the marks of Christ in their body? Have they ever faced death for Christ? No, the game they play offers no regard like this. And then he will say in verse 24, from the Jews, 5 times I received 40 stripes, minus 1. Well, that was a protection against overdoing it, according to the law. And what would happen is the victim would be laid out flat on the ground, stripped, and either a rod or a whip would be used, or sometimes they'd be tied to a post with their hands over their head and stripped, and a rod used to beat them, or sometimes a whip with leather ends with sharp things sewn into or somehow made part of the leather ends that would just rend and tear the person that is being whipped. He says, have they been whipped like that? Then in verse 26 or verse 25, 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned, 3 times I was shipwrecked. And not in the day, I've been in the deep. And now then in 26, he's going to talk about these perils. And really the emphasis is not on the perils as much as it is the travels. And what Paul is saying here is, have they traveled this broadly? If they want to compare pedigrees here, then have they traveled this broadly? Is this on their resume too? So the emphasis is the travel that Paul is giving. So he says, in journeys often, in perils of water, in perils of robber, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in perils and in toils, in sleeplessness often, hunger and thirsting and fastings often, in cold and nakedness. Have they been received this way? Here are these perils that have come that Paul has faced in all these travels. They had no commission. These false ministers could never make an apostolic journey like Paul had done because they've not been commissioned to do so. But they're impelled to come and tell you these things. Paul said, as he says in verse 27, here's the weariness in the body, the distressing weariness, no relaxation, hungering and thirst, cold and nakedness, many a day, both of them. We travel very little with us. Have they done that? And if the physical suffering wasn't enough, notice what he says next. Beside these things, what comes upon me daily. And this idea of daily is the idea of it's crowding in on me. It's presenting pressure. The intention is to bear down on him. Here is this weariness that is bearing down on Paul. And so he says, beside that, what comes upon me daily, my deep concern for all the churches. That's my concern. Maybe that was a greater challenge for Paul than these other things that were physical. This was internal. And so his point about this is, if we're playing the part of the fool here, do these guys really care that way? Have these guys really expended that kind of effort and that kind of internal care and concern for you? Look at what I'm doing for you. And yet these guys come in Again, if you go back to verse 26, they put you in bondage, they devour you, they take from you, they exalt themselves, they strike you, they boast about themselves, they come bring you a different Christ. And what do? You may well put up with it, but not us. We're not. Why don't you judge us the same way? Because look at what we've done. We've got something to back up our resume. That's the fact. That's not folly. Now, what about them? What do they have to back up? And so he will say then, who is made weak and I'm not weak? Who is made to stumble and I am not made to stumble? Is any man weak, too weak to bear his load? And am I, Paul says, not weak? Has anyone a burden that is greater than mine to make his legs give way? It senses this. Is anyone getting himself into a fatal trap? And I, on my part, not doing that, even far worse, getting myself into a fire? Is anyone being trapped? And I am not worse than being trapped, but being burned with fire. Is anyone whose work, whose burden's about to kill, as a trap closes down and crushes the victim? If there is, am not I, Paul, one who is literally being burned by fire in my work? Is anyone weak and I'm not in sympathy, share his weakness? Where's the sympathy in this? And so he will say, I must boast. If I must boast, I will boast in the things which concern my infirmity. In other words, I'm not going to boast and exalt myself in all the things that I'm going to accomplish. I'll boast in my infirmities. I'll boast in the things that are low, not all the high things. I'm not going to boast about all my trophies on the wall. I'm not going to boast about the notches on my pistol handle. I'm not going to boast about all these people that I've saved. I'll boast in my infirmities. That's not what they're doing. Because he says, the God and Father of the Lord Jesus Christ, who's blessed forever, knows I'm not lying. This is not facetious. When we are reduced to nothing, God is allowed to be our everything. So he says, verse 32 and 33, in Damascus, the governor under Artus the king was guarding the city of Demosthenes with a garrison desiring to arrest me. But I was let down in a basket through a window in the wall and escaped from his hands. Here Paul's life was being threatened. And he was led to Damascus, penitent, weak, stricken, a blind man in Acts chapter 9. And here his life is being threatened, and he is now being let down outside the wall. There's nothing very impressive about being dumped in a basket and let down through a window to flee for your life. Paul never received the royal treatment of serving Christ. But again, that's not what he was looking for. Paul, this chapter just drips with sarcasm. Paul's point is clear. These guys are fakes, and they've taken advantage of you, and you've put up with it. But I have not been given the same treatment. But then again, I don't expect a crown here on earth, because there is laid up for me a crown in heaven, but not only for me, but for all those who love the Lord at his appearing. Well, thanks for joining me. And next time we'll look at chapter 12. We're closing in on the end of the book. Hope you have a good day. Thank you.